Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the City Club of Portland. My name is Susan Hammer, and I am president of City Club. I'm delighted to see so many of you here today, and I think we're going to have a terrific program. Before we begin, I'd like to remind you to turn off your cell phones and other things that make noise. And we have a few announcements. Next Friday forum will be on media, fact or fiction, and the person who will be speaking is Jeff Cohen. He's a media critic. He is on-air commentator for MSNBC, Fox News, and CNN's Crossfire. He's a frequent guest on Today, Larry King Live, C-SPAN, NPR, and he's the author of 4 books. It should be a terrific program. We have a few upcoming events. This afternoon at City Club Commons, we will have this afternoon at City Club Commons, we will have a special event. We'll have the people who were involved with the study committees on the 2 ballot measures coming to talk with you about how they reached the conclusions they reached and provide whatever background they needed to provide. So this is an event that's open to everyone, members and guests, refreshments and conversations beginning at 4:30, going till 6 o'clock, and we hope to see you there. Next week, the New Leaders Council is doing a program called Under 30 in City Hall. We'll explore life working and holding public office at City Hall. They'll be meeting with City Hall staffers who are under 30 from the mayor's office and from the commissioner's office. There are details about this in the bulletin. It'll be at City Hall. And then finally, we have a new art exhibit at the City Club Commons beginning the first Thursday, May 3rd. It's called Just Seeds, and there will be an opening on first Thursday with the artists. Please check your bulletin for details. We have a few new members here today who I'd like to introduce and welcome. New members, when you hear your name, please stand, and if you'd all hold your applause, and then we will welcome them both. The first person is Dave Bledsoe, who is a returning member. He's an attorney at Perkins Coie. David, where are you seated? Right here. And David Soy, who is a teacher at the Open Meadows Schools, who's right in the back. Welcome to City Club. We have a special deal going this month, and I hope it will be irresistible to any of you who would consider joining City Club. If you join this month, at least until our coupons hold out, you will get a free lunch. And anyone who shows in the referred by place on the form will also get a free lunch. So we hope that you will do that. These free lunches are compliments of our friend and member Al Jubitz. We are so fortunate in Portland to have great corporate sponsors that help make these programs possible, not only for all of you, but for our radio and television audience. Our sponsors this quarter are Schwabe, Williamson & Wyatt, and KeyBank. Would you please join me in thanking them? Our program today is a debate on ballot measure 2691. This is a very important subject, our city's form of government. We have some very knowledgeable and interesting people who will help us make sense out of all of this today. Speaking in favor of the ballot measure is Robert Ball. Bob is a leading Portland historic developer specializing in the restoration of historic buildings. His projects have included the historic Marshall Wells Loft, the former Myron Frank warehouse called the Avenue Lofts, the Embassy condominiums, and he's currently developing the Wyatt, a new condominium tower. Bob led the campaign to change the form of government in 2002, and he served on the City Council's latest charter commission, whose work on this issue spans some 14 months. Bob has also been very active in voter-owned elections. Since 1996, Bob has served as a reserve police officer and continues to hold the rank of captain. He's been recognized by the Portland Business Journal of one of the 40 under 40 most influential young business leaders in the Portland metropolitan area. Welcome, Bob. And speaking against the ballot measure is Chris Smith. Chris is co-chair and treasurer of the Committee for Accountable City Government. Chris is a citizen activist on issues of transportation, neighborhoods, and civic engagement. He's a citizen representative on the Metro Policy Advisory Committee. He chairs the Citizens Advisory Committee on Portland Streetcar, and he publishes a blog about access and mobility in the Portland-Vancouver metro area. He's also a former member of the City Club of Portland Board of Governors. And finally, we are fortunate to have our brilliant moderator, Nick Fish. Nick is a partner in Myron Wise. He specializes in labor and employment law. He's a citizen activist. He's involved with the Volunteers of America, the Campaign for Equal Justice, and he was most recently named Commissioner of the Oregon Cultural Trust. He's also involved with the Center for Urban and Public Affairs at Portland State University. Nick is a radio host for Outlook Portland with Nick Fish on KRCW. So we will begin with Nick, who will explain the format for today's debate. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Susan, and welcome everybody. This is the format that the participants and the City Club have agreed to for today's discussion. First, Anna Griffin, a crack reporter from the Oregonian who covers City Hall, will provide a neutral primer on the current form of government and how ballot measure 2691 would change it. I will then moderate a 20-minute discussion with Chris Smith and Bob Ball concerning the ballot measure. While there are no strict time limits, the parties have agreed to keep their answers to approximately 1 minute. My role is to ask questions, including any reasonable follow-up questions. Following our discussion, the City Club has invited 4 people to ask questions from the floor. Representing the proponents of Measure 2691 are Jim Meyer, a small business owner, and Paul Meyer, a member of the Charter Review Commission. Representing the opponents to this ballot measure are James Hester from AFSCME and former Mayor Bud Clark. They will each have 1 minute to ask a question. Time permitting, we will then open the discussion to City Club members. At approximately 1:10, Chris Smith and Bob Ball will each be given 90 seconds for a closing statement, and their statements will be timed. And then City Club President Susan Hammer will adjourn the meeting. I now call on Anna Griffin.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Nick. Crack reporter is by far the nicest thing I've been called recently. And thank you to the City Club for letting me do the wonky work before the fun of the debate today. Since 1913, Portland has been run by something called the commission form of government. Under this system, the mayor and 4 city commissioners share executive authority over the various agencies or bureaus. Each member of the City Council oversees a portfolio of bureaus. Randy Leonard, for example, runs the Water Bureau, the Bureau of Development Services, the Bureau of Emergency Communications. Sam Adams is the boss of the Bureau of Environmental Services, which takes care of your sewer and your stormwater, and the Office of Transportation, which paves and maintains our roads. Individual commissioners hire and fire bureau directors, sometimes checking with their colleagues, sometimes not. The mayor typically runs some of the most high-profile bureaus, like the Police Department or the Planning Bureau or the Office of Management and Finance, which oversees the city's budget. But his single greatest power is the ability to assign bureaus to commissioners and take them back again. Basically, if you're a city commissioner, the mayor is the one who decides if you enjoy your job or not, if you spend your days doing something that interests you, or if you spend your days taking care of the garbage, taking care of the sewer, that kind of thing. The mayor and the commissioners also serve as the legislative branch. They each have a vote on the city council, and the mayor does not have a veto. Measure 2691 would abandon the commission system. Instead, executive authority would be centralized under the mayor. He would appoint, and the council would confirm, a professional chief administrative officer to run the city and all the bureaus. The mayor would appoint bureau directors, again with the council approving his hires. The mayor could fire the chief administrative officer and bureau directors without council approval, and the chief administrative officer would have the primary duty for hiring and firing everyone below bureau director level, except a few political appointees and a few other important positions. On the legislative side, the city council would still consist of 5 members. The mayor would still have 1 vote. He still would not have a veto. Rather than day-to-day management of bureaus, city commissioners would presumably spend their time talking to constituents, investigating city affairs, and establishing a strategic plan for the city. Supporters of the change say that the current form of government is messy, and to an extent, they're right. Different bureaus have different cultures, usually modeled on the commissioner in charge's leadership style, and different policies toward dealing with the public. City government is also full of redundancies. Several bureaus, for example, have offices that perform similar maintenance work. 4 bureaus have their own payroll systems. There are more than 300 shadow computer systems within the bureaucracy. Proponents of Measure 2691 say that centralizing executive power will make it easier to eliminate those redundancies, saving taxpayers money and making the maze of bureaucracy easier for normal people to navigate. Opponents of the change acknowledge that the commission system can be convoluted and sometimes confusing if you're not somebody who spends your day in City Hall. But they say that's a small price to pay for the creativity the commission system seems to have generated here in Portland. Many of the things that make Portland great, they'll tell you, our public transportation system, our vast network of parks and green space, our commitment to ending homelessness and promoting sustainable development, are the direct result of city commissioners pushing policies and projects through the bureaus they control. Portland is the last major American city to operate under the commission system. Portland voters have rejected the change 7 times over the last 94 years. So the central question in this election, the one I'm sure you're going to hear repeated today, is Portland great because of or in spite of its form of government? Thank you very much.
Oh. Thank you very much, Anna. Bob Ball, Chris Smith, thank you for taking time to join us this morning. Let's get started. Bob, you and other critics of the current form of government argue that one of the flaws in our system is that city commissioners exercise both executive and legislative powers. You advocate for a separation of those powers. Under Measure 2691, the mayor's executive authority would be strengthened, but he would continue to serve as a voting member of the council without also increasing the power of council or individual council members. Is this a structural flaw with the ballot measure?
No, I don't believe it is. The Citizen Commission thought very carefully and hard about this specific issue. We believe that the mayor should still be involved with the other council members, know what was happening on the city council, and be involved in the legislative process because we didn't want the mayor to be too strong. We found that if the mayor was completely separated from the legislative branch, they were stronger, and they have the bully pulpit, and normally when they're separated, they would have the veto power. We thought that the mayor should stay a part of the council, still keep things the Portland way so that they're all involved in the decision-making process.
Thank you. Chris Smith, in a flyer sent to my home yesterday, authored by Portlanders for Accountability, which I understand is not your group, the claim is made that 2691 will allow the mayor to, quote, sell parkland and other public property without a vote of the city council, end quote. In light of the requirement that a majority of the council must first vote to declare city property as surplus property, isn't this claim highly misleading?
Well, yes and no, Nick. And as you said, this is not from the committee that Mayor Clark and I chair. There are 2 parts to the process of selling off a park or some other piece of property. First, declaring that it's no longer needed for public use, and then the actual process of the sale. Under today's charter, that first step requires 3 votes. That would not change with the charter revision, that's correct. But the second phase of the process changes very much. Right now, it requires a 4/5 vote of the city council to decide to sell it, to set the price, who you're going to sell it to, and under what terms. Under the new charter, the proposed charter, the mayor would have all those powers exclusively. And I can't understand under a measure that's purported to increase checks and balances why you would give the ability, for example, to set the price exclusively to one individual.
Bob Ball, in light of the council's experience with both the capping of the Mount Tabor Reservoir and the proposed sale of parkland to Warner Pacific College, why do you believe that the mayor's authority should be strengthened in this area?
Well, I really don't believe that it will be strengthened. As Chris said, and as you just heard, the flyer that was sent out to the public was completely misleading. The bottom line is the council holds all the power. They must decide that a property is a surplus property or that we will sell it, and frankly, they can negotiate with the mayor before they do that of what the terms of those sale can be. And by the way, they can also establish a process by which that property would be sold, and they can negotiate with the mayor ahead of time. As we've seen by the two examples that you've given, the public, the citizens of Portland, would never allow a mayor or a council to sell a piece of property that was important to all of us. We thought about this very topic very carefully on the Citizen Commission, and I feel very confident and know that the mayor would not have the power to do that unilaterally, and it's not good that we see those kinds of materials come out to the public that just aren't true.
Chris Smith, your side argues that 2691 would allow developers, particularly downtown developers, to, in effect, control city government. Who are the developers that are plotting to take over city government? And how does 2691 make that easier?
Well, first, I don't necessarily believe that developers control city government. I do find it interesting that much of the funding for the pro side in this campaign is coming from the Portland Business Alliance in very large checks, and Bob will point out fairly that most of the money for no is coming from unions in very large checks, which is maybe why we wanted to have more of a public conversation before we moved into election mode. But I think the mechanism most of us are concerned about is that right now the various boards and commissions in the city are appointed by each of the commissioners in charge. If this ballot measure were to pass, the mayor would be the commissioner in charge and would have the appointment authority for all boards and commissions.
Just a follow-up question on that, Chris. Currently, the Metro president has the exclusive power to appoint members of boards and commissions. Any evidence that David Bragdon has abused that authority?
Well, he appointed me, so I think he's doing some good things. But I disagree with your premise. The two most important committees at Metro are the Joint Policy Alternatives Committee on Transportation and the Metro Policy Advisory Committee, and both of those have very diverse membership from around the region, largely elected officials elected by their citizens. So I don't think it's comparable.
Bob Ball, Mayor Tom Potter argues that the average citizen simply doesn't have the access at City Hall that unions and big business do. How would Measure 2691 give the average citizen more access to City Hall?
Well, the mayor is absolutely right, and he campaigned on that issue to open up City Hall for average citizens. Right now, if you are a big business or a labor organization, you have power, and you always will have that power in City Hall. What this measure will do is give citizens, because the council members aren't managing their bureaus day to day, they'll have more time to spend out in the community understanding what's important to our city, what our priorities of our city should be, and if you're an average citizen, if you have a problem, right now if you go to the transportation commissioner and that person doesn't like what you have to say, that's it, you're done. The council members aren't holding each other accountable. The other thing is that it's very, very difficult for the average citizen to understand the maze and confusing mess of the different bureaus and the people that head them in City Hall. We heard on the commission that average people just don't understand how to navigate it. A broken sewer pipe in a neighborhood, heard a story how one bureau had the sidewalks, the other one had the water pipe, and they fought for 7 months who was going to fix the citizen's sewer pipe. And that happens every day in small and big ways.
Chris Smith, I got my voter's pamphlet the other day, and I read it, and this is what I learned about 2691. Opponents of the ballot measure refer to it as radical and as a shameless power grab. A former city auditor said that Portland doesn't need a czar. There are even references to George Bush's abuse of power in Washington. Here's my question. If this is such a radical, extreme measure, why has every city in America with a population of over 100,000 abandoned the commission-style form of government?
Well, you know, I think of our form of government a little bit like the way we dress. Portland is a decidedly casual town. Jeans work in a lot of places, and I think that the proposal to basically sweep away our form of government and replace it with what everyone else uses is sort of like saying it's time that Portland grew up and start wearing a suit and tie. Portland is unique. I believe our form of government fits us very well, and there is no need to completely replace it. I'm very open to incremental improvements, but you know, we're throwing out the baby with the bathwater.
Bob Ball, one of the criticisms of the City Club Charter Review study group was that the proponents had not met their burden of proof. So we're going to give you a chance today to meet that burden. Let's start with the particular proposal. What city in America would you cite to as a model for a city that uses a similar form of government as you advocate, and how is that city today better serving its citizens?
Well, first I'd like to say that several thousand cities use a similar or a variation of this type of form of government. What I'll cite for an example is that Portland, we learned last year, we've done great things in this city and we'll continue to do them, but we have fallen to number 37 out of 46 cities on how well we manage our finances and deliver city services. And what that means to citizens is that we're not using our taxpayer dollars as wisely as we could. And if we make this change, it's going to make us more efficient and give us more money to do the things that are important to all of us citizens, like our transportation systems, housing, the things that really make it special. The bottom line is we're less efficient, we're duplicating services, and we've learned that we can be much, much better to continue the things that are important to us.
Bob Ball, I still don't want to come back to my question. You said there are thousands of cities. I'll settle for one. What one city that is of comparable size nationally would you point to that has a similar form of government as the one you're advocating that you think does a better job?
Well, in terms of managing finances and delivering services, the studies that we saw, now again, this is not how they look as a community or what their citizen involvement is, and I want to really say that nobody wants to be anything but Portland in terms of our people. But you know, the city that we saw does the best, I believe, was Phoenix, in just how well they actually get police officers to your door and as quick as possible and fixing the potholes and doing those things. But nobody on the Citizens Commission wanted us to be any different city. But we did feel that, as we always do, we could look to other cities for best practices and figure out how we can do a better job in certain areas, and that's what this measure will help us do easier.
Chris Smith, is Phoenix a better run city?
Well, as Susan mentioned, I'm a transportation blogger. We recently had a discussion about a proposal in Phoenix where they said if we could just increase this one freeway from 12 lanes to 24, we'd solve our traffic congestion. I don't want to move to Phoenix. Does anybody else want to move to Phoenix? And you know, I believe that our city is extremely well financially managed. Moody's just upgraded one kind of bond rating in the general obligation bond. We have a AAA rating, the highest possible rating. You know, Bob has cited the opinion of one magazine or one organization. There are lots of other opinions that contradict that.
Bob Ball, we're going to go back to the burden of proof issue. And one of the things that the City Club report stated was that the supporters had failed to give concrete examples of problems that have been caused by Portland's present form of government, which I think is a fair question. So I'm going to give you an opportunity to identify between 1 and 3 concrete examples of actions taken by the City of Portland that would have been different under a strong mayor form of government.
Well, the first most noticeable last one, and we've all heard about this, is the tram. Going from $15 or $17 million to $57 million. We had 5 different transportation managers in as many years, 5 years. As those costs went up, it kind of took on a life of its own, and no one from the city was there to say, hey, wait a minute, something's wrong. A second one that the City Club committee actually missed in one of their prior reports was that, in fact, the Office of Management and Finance and the Bureau of Environmental Services told the Water Bureau when their billing system issue came up to not change their computer system. Because the Commissioner of Water was independent, he did it anyway, and it cost the city $27 million.
I want to switch gears for a second, Chris Smith, and talk a little bit about the process that led us to this debate. As we know, 26 citizens serving on a charter review commission spent over a year reviewing the charter. They held over 100 public meetings, heard from dozens of witnesses, and collectively devoted probably close to 2,000 hours on this project. I was struck by a comment you made in the Oregonian the other day, where you told a reporter that you thought the work of the commission was predetermined and not subject to sufficient public debate. I want to give you a chance to explain that comment.
Sure. Bob and I were also opponents in the 2002 measure, and I made the comment after that if we wanted to change the charter, a commission was the right way to do that. So I was actually quite open when Mayor Potter appointed the commission. I actually applied to be a member, and he didn't pick me. That's fine. I don't have any sour grapes. The mayor did an excellent job of ensuring ethnic and racial and gender diversity on the commission. What's apparent to me from reviewing the report and some of the minutes is that not as much thought was given to diversity of opinion in forming that. And I fear that there were several strong voices on that commission that had previously urged replacement of the commission form, and not enough counterbalancing voices. And as to process, very concerned that we only had 2 weeks from the final publication of the Commission's report until the measures were put on the ballot. I think that had there been more time for community conversation before we moved into election mode, issues of whether the auditor's employees work for the auditor or the mayor, the issue of who can set the price on selling property, could have been fixed, and we wouldn't have some of these issues to debate right now.
I just want to push you, though, because the word predetermined is a loaded word. Do you have any evidence that, in fact, the people who were selected and the instructions they got were that you're supposed to come out with a particular outcome, or was this an honest process?
I'm not going to say it's a dishonest process. I think we would have had a better result if there was more diversity of opinion going in.
Well, Bob Ball, I don't want to let you off the hook either. So another criticism as to process that we've heard is that as people who've raised concerns about why this is being placed on a May ballot rather than November ballot. And I went back and looked at some of the numbers, and the truth is that in a May election, off year, very few people vote. When we're debating something as important as the form of our government, why not put it on a November ballot where we're assured to get more people involved in voting?
Well, the first thing I want to say is that this was not a 2-week process. The Citizens Commission spent 14 months, had over 100 public meetings, 2,000 hours, talked to neighborhood associations, elderly groups, other civic organizations. People and our citizens were very involved. We went to all these different parts of the cities, had meetings in schools and at different places where community members meet. The commission came out with this report. The city council, not the commission members, decided to put it on the May ballot. I'm fine with that. We went through a very long process, I think the most open and comprehensive public process I've seen in Portland that I can ever remember.
Chris Smith, you are a noted supporter of public financing of campaigns in council races.
Yes, it's Bob.
You both are. In this particular election, according to the last reports that I saw, the AFL-CIO has put in about $200,000 to defeat the ballot measure, and there's about $70,000 of money that's been put in by the business community to support it. Are you concerned about the amount of unregulated special interest money in this election?
Absolutely. I've been a campaign finance reform supporter for many years, since studying the issue for City Club back in 2000. Unfortunately, while we have voter-owned elections as a potential remedy for candidate elections, we haven't found an equivalent for ballot measure elections, which is why I would have much preferred a process like the one we used for the fire and police disability reform to modify the charter, where you bring stakeholders together, get a broad consensus before you move to the ballot. Gentlemen,
we have a couple of minutes left before we go to our panel of distinguished questioners. Bob Bob Ball, the proponents of this measure say that it would save between $10 and $15 million a year. Where do you get that number?
Well, first of all, I want to say that's just the very beginning. That number comes from a report that the City Council commissioned by a group called the Hackett Group. They only looked at 3 areas in 13 of our 31 bureaus and found that by ending duplication, being more coordinated, not having the 400 or 300 shadow computer systems, and all those other things, that we could save between $10 to $15 million. Steve Bauer, an ex-finance director for the city, he estimates that 25% of our entire budget could be saved. Now, I personally think that might be a little high, but I think it could be somewhere in between those two. So I think that the 10 to 15 million is just the start. It makes common sense. When we're more coordinated, we're working towards the same goals, we're going to do a better job, we're going to save more money, and it's going to be better for taxpayers.
Chris Smith, opponents of 2691 say that it will cost taxpayers more than $2 million a year to implement. Where do you get that number?
Well, there's a similar experience going on in San Diego right now, where they have moved not from a commission form, but from another, between forms of government and one that gives the mayor more authority. They've had to establish an independent Office of Budget Review, so the council has independent staff to check the mayor's budget. That's cost, I think, $1.2 million is the number there. We're going to give the Chief Administrative Officer expanded responsibilities, so the Bureau Directors now report to him. It's not reasonable to think that the Chief Administrative Officer can supervise 16 Bureau heads. So there will, I think, reasonably be an assumption of deputies in that office that will have to do that. Pretty easy to get to $2 million.
Gentlemen, last question before we turn it over to our distinguished panel. Mr. Ball, hypothetical. In January of 2009, you're sworn in as the next mayor of Portland. This particular ballot measure has gone down to a spectacular defeat. Tell us 2 ways that you can make City Hall more efficient and accountable without changing the charter.
Well, what I would do is I would get the other commissioners together, and I would say that we need to be more coordinated and we need to talk to each other. And our services, we shouldn't be duplicated. And I would get commitments from them on our goals, and frankly, I would put up outside of each one of our doors a list of the things that we've had to agree to and the goals that we said we would accomplish to hold them accountable. But I do believe that would be very difficult. I believe that because of the power they wield independently, it would be very difficult for me to do that, but I would do it and do the best job that I could.
I see he's already getting comfortable in his new job. Chris Smith, it's January of 2009. You have hypothetically been elected to the council. 2 things that you would do, absent charter change, to make things work better.
I think the first thing I would do is form a committee on strategic planning, because I think one of the criticisms of the commission form I actually agree with is that it is difficult to get a unified vision when you have 5 executives. So I would try and create a structure that involved both elected members of council and citizens to have a regular process of forming and then reviewing a strategic plan for the city.
Let's give them a round of applause for the first round of these conversations. We've invited 4 citizens to pose the first questions, and the first question goes to Jim Meyer, a small business owner, and sir, you have 1 minute.
Thank you. I should say that I also was a member of the Charter Review Commission. My question is to Chris Smith. Chris, you have said here and in other places that there was not enough opportunity for diversity of opinion to be expressed from the public. The commission held over 100 meetings, as you know, all of which were televised, and all of which, one was not televised because the television equipment wasn't present, but all of which had opportunity for public input, and they were held all over the city. Now, you are someone who had a different opinion before we started and had a different opinion when we finished. I'd like to know, as a representative of the public, how many of our meetings you attended, and what kind of input you gave us during this process.
I attended one meeting. I don't know if I gave any input. I don't remember if I filled out a comment card or not. I may have, I may not have. And I watched, I think, one other on television. Let me distinguish the two things you said. I think my concern is not with the work of the commission, because I appreciate the volunteer time and the effort that you folks put in. My concern was the diversity of thought going in terms of the membership of the commission, and then the amount of process once you produced your public report. You certainly gave the public opportunities for input into your process, but there are a section of the public and a part of the process that can't happen until your recommendations are complete, and that's the part that I think was short-circuited.
Our next question is from James Hester, who's here representing AFSCME.
Yes, this question is going to go to Bob. Bob, as you know, I'm the council representative for AFSCME Local 189. I also serve as president of the District Council of Trade Unions. And we represent approximately 1,800 public employees in the city of Portland. As you know, unions are one of the few organizations in our society that give voice to the needs and the priorities of average men and women, working families throughout the country, but indeed in the city of Portland. And you also know that unions have been at the forefront of many fights: civil rights fight, rights for diversity, rights for equal pay for equal work. So my question is this: why should Portland working families support a measure whose only real impact, according to one of the key financial supporters of the measure, is to silence the voice of dedicated employees who belong to a union and the voice of union members?
Well, first of all, James, the person who said that quote in the paper has absolutely no part of the Charter Commission or this campaign, and I wholly dispute what he says, and I don't believe it's true. I believe in your organization, and James and I are friends, and I actually welcome the support that you gave my initiative the last time AFSCME, as well as the other unions. The way that this will impact working people and the people of the city of Portland is, I believe, that when we're better and we're more coordinated and we're thinking together as bureaus, we're going to do a better job, we're going to save more money, so we have more money to pay our valuable employees and give them the tools that they need to do their job well, and to make sure that they can communicate easily with each other to do the things that are important to us. And that's how I believe it will benefit average working people.
Before I recognize our next speaker, I would encourage City Club members to begin to queue up so that they have an opportunity you have an opportunity to ask your questions during this discussion. And the microphone, the only microphone in the room, is on this side of the room. Our next questioner is Paul Meyer, who was also a member of the Charter Review Commission. Sir.
Thank you. In the City Club report of 2002, reference was made to an interview with Steve Bauer, who was Mayor Bud Clark's Chief of Finance and Administration. He served from 1986 to 1995 under Mayor Katz. He described the current form of government as a feudal system with lots of palace intrigue. And then very specifically, in addition to saying he thought the friction loss from this system might run as high as 25%. This is what is cited, and I'm quoting from the City Club report. Bauer cited as another example of friction loss the problems with the Water Bureau billing system. He believes the problems could have been prevented if Water Bureau staff had not been able to work through their commissioner to override the objections of the Office of Financial Administration. Now, that is a but-for situation in which, but for the commission form, in which a commissioner could override the mayor's office in the Department of Finance and Administration, the computer fiasco costing the taxpayers $30 million would never have occurred.
Just in fairness to the other questioners, is there a question?
The question, and the question to the panel is, do you have any hard evidence that that is not correct?
Well, I'll say first that City Club adopted the minority report in that particular piece of research. But I think the more important point is that whoever you think is responsible for the Water Bureau fiasco or why it happened, Commissioner Eric Sten, who was running the Water Bureau, had to defend what happened and why he deserved continued support for leadership in the next election, which I think is one of the great merits of the commission form.
Paul, I think you're absolutely right. That is what caused it, and because of the commission forum, the other two commissioners were not able to stop the one commissioner from going forward.
Our next distinguished speaker is a former mayor, Bud Clark, but first I'd like to ask, sir, I came home the other night and apparently you left a message on my phone for my wife, and I'd like to ask you what's going on. Mayor Bud Clark.
Was I just returning her call? Anyway, you took my question away when I was coming up here, and I had a smooch with my former chief of staff, Chris Tobkin, who was here in the audience too, and a long time, well, she was secretary, I think, here for years ago and so forth. Executive director, excuse me, that's the big deal. But anyway, I lost my question, but I have another question, and I got to remember what the hell it is now, but the first thing is I wish that Mayor Potter had put Chris Smith on the Charter Review Committee, because he would have been very good, there's no doubt about it, and would have put a balance. But I wanted that to be a joke, but I think you took my joke away with the deal. Anyway, I respect the committee very much, and you did a fantastic job of working on this, and I especially respect Jim Meyer for being the chair of the Charter Review Committee subcommittee. They worked very hard, but I still wish there was a more diverse committee there, and I don't understand why they didn't take my advice, which was to strengthen the charter in relationship to the neighborhoods and correct maybe a neighborhood congress, and also the question about maybe adding another commissioner. Do you have any response to that?
I do.
Or two commissioners.
Yeah. Thank you, Mayor Clark. I do have a response. The commission recognized every presenter, every academic expert, city council passed for all the experts sit except one lone person, that the commission form was incompatible with any kind of representative government, or if you elected the commissioners by district, because then you would have the parks commissioner maybe from one area of town, and they might try to get more of the parks for their area.
I've never said that. I never wanted by district. I've never wanted by district ever.
And I'm going to talk about the neighborhood congresses and those kinds of things. What we realized is that there was so much diverse opinion on this issue, and there were so many different kinds of representative forums. We were given a task to look at 4 big areas in a short time frame. We knew the form would have to be changed first before we implemented that type of a system. And so we believe that community discussion was so big that it needed to have a much thorough process than the time constraints and the other issues that we were looking at. And the other thing that we did is we made it a part of the package is if we have ongoing charter reform, the first one would be in 2 years, and thereafter every 10 years. We'd hope that we could address that and other important issues in the 2 years.
Chris?
I think Mayor Clark's onto something, that it's the difference between just starting with the assumption this doesn't work and we have to replace it with something else and modifying it. There is an issue that people, particularly outer east side Portland, feel underrepresented in our government. If you were, just as a hypothetical, to add 4 non-executive counselors to this council, you would get both increased representation from a different angle. You'd also have people who could address the issue that some proponents have pointed out. It'd be nice to have somebody looking over the shoulder to the executive commissioners and doing the budget. So there was no in between. Yeah.
We're now moving to questions from City Club members. If you could state your name and pose your question, please.
Thank you. Jonathan Rodmacher, City Club member. I'm not sure how much was paid to the Hackett Group to study efficiencies or from whose budget it came from, but I know the present Chief Administrative Officer of the city, who's within the mayor's authority, is specifically under the current code, quote, responsible for the overall coordination of the administrative service functions of the city. Has that person created a spreadsheet of all the different efficiencies that can be accomplished with a dollar figure? If not, why not? And isn't that something that the person should be doing and presenting to the council to approve or reject all these different efficiencies that supposedly exist?
The first question is, I think that the council spent about $80,000. I'm not sure to do the report. Second is, we actually heard from the former chief administrative officer on this issue, Tim Grew, and he said, the frustrating part was that they could do all of that analysis and they could come up with the ideas to eliminate the duplication, to get the bureaus purchasing things the same way, get everybody on the payroll systems of the city from the different bureaus, but they would come up with these different things and the bureau directors or the other commissioners would ignore them because they just didn't have the power to implement it. So we did look at that, we listened to them, they just don't have the authority. They're given a title, but they're not able to execute on that.
Thank you.
The thing I find interesting reading the Hackett report is that the final paragraph says that the Hackett Group actually found the City of Portland less complex than other organizations that they've analyzed. And I think it's worth remembering that the City of Portland is a $3 billion enterprise. Any organization that large is going to have silos. In fact, our current Chief Administrative Officer, Ken Rust, is very good. He was just elected President of the National Association of Chief Administrative Officers. So I think there's plenty of room for improvement, sure, but I think there are mechanisms and tools in place that can take a great run at that.
Next question.
Bob, I guess it was 5 years ago, how time flies, you proposed radical change to the city government, similar to what you're proposing now, but with differences, one of which was the representation from various neighborhoods or areas. Can you give us just a brief summary of the differences between your proposal and the one that's on the ballot now, and why you favor this one? Thank you.
Sure. The proposal that I proposed in 2002 was a real strong mayor forum. That's where the mayor is separated. They have all the executive authority, but they also have 2/3 of the legislative authority because of the veto. This is different in that we did have a 26-member commission, and we listened to academic experts, current, former elected officials, other elected officials from all over the country. And we felt that we didn't want the mayor to be a strong mayor. We felt that this was simply taking the administrative functions away from politicians, putting it into the hands of a professional manager, and increasing the access or the access of citizens and the accountability of that, because it would free up the council to have oversight. My former proposal had districts, and the executive and legislative were completely separate with a strong mayor. This is a system that really keeps things the Portland way. It just shifts those professional management duties away from the elected officials to professional managers.
If I could pose a follow-up question, Chris, you state in your literature that if it ain't broke, why fix it? I'm curious, are there any changes to our charter which you support, which would strengthen our form of government?
Well, yeah, I think I just gave one hypothetical of perhaps adding some non-executive counselors by district without replacing the commission form itself. I am open to having a robust discussion about how we can improve things. I don't want to start from the premise that what we have is so unworkable it has to go away.
Next question.
Justin Gottlieb, City Club member. This is for Mr. Ball. I am on the committee in opposition to the measure. I want to talk a little bit about the Chief Administrative Officer, which you've proposed. I haven't heard anyone talk in great length about this position and what's going to prevent hirings, firings, and really drawing the analogy with what we're going through with the Portland Public Schools, where about every 3 years we do an executive search, it costs hundreds of thousands of dollars, we hire someone, they stick around for 3 years, then they leave. This seems like it's very inefficient and doesn't lead to the stability that you're proposing this position will create.
Well, the Citizen Commission did think very, very carefully about that issue. In fact, that's why universally we discarded the idea of a city manager type of government. We heard stories where city managers, they came into a council meeting, they got a good job approval rating, they got a raise, and they got fired all in the same meeting. And we felt that and the reason is because, like the school board, that one person has to answer to an entire board, and they're always worried about something happening over the back with all the council members. We felt that just expanding the role of our current chief administrative officer, actually giving him the power and the authority, or not really power, but the authority to do what their job description is now is really what we were looking for, to coordinate those services, to be more productive, to make sure the bureaus are communicating about the work that they're doing with each other, and that's why we ended up landing where we were.
Next question.
Pauline Anderson, member. Chris, I want you to know that even if this measure passes, I'll still wear jeans. We have, within the last few years, experienced the frustration of dealing with city silos that don't speak to each other, and it appeared don't want to speak to us either. Assuming that this measure does not pass, voters who haven't experienced such frustrations are likely to say, "Ain't broke, don't fix it," unquote. What can the commissioners do to improve inter-silo communications?
Well, thank you, Pauline. As I said, I think any sufficiently large organization is going to have silos, and the correct approach is to say, what can we do to break them down? I think we have tremendous experience in this city with citizen commissions, not unlike the Charter Review Commission, to take a look at things and recommend changes. And I don't know why we wouldn't put together one on professional management practices and have them analyze how bureaus work together. We have great tools here in our city to improve things.
Bob, from my report.
Well, I can tell you what we found was that, in fact, the commissioners have to spend an extraordinary amount of time, the mayor and commissioners, working around the current system. And so the mayor had his 20 bureau innovation project stuff, and they have 8 or 10 different task force. All of those things, all of that energy and loss is spent trying to work around the inefficiencies of the current system. Will we continue to do that? Absolutely. Should we make it easier for our elected officials and our citizens to be more coordinated, to do a better job, to achieve the goals that we as citizens want? Absolutely. If we pass this, that'll happen.
Next question.
Leslie Moorhead, City Club member. We keep hammering away here at the efficiency issue, which I think is extremely important, and saving money by being more efficient, of course, is a desire that everyone has. So I have a two-part question, and the first part is for Chris, and the second part is for Bob. Chris, at the detail level, I still don't understand why we cannot solve the problem of 300 to 400 computer systems. That just doesn't make any sense to me, and why is the possibility of changing the form of government going to solve that, or can we do that without changing the form of government? That's the efficiency gut level detail approach. For Bob, I'd like to say, okay, let's say changing the form of government is a way to improve the efficiency on the overall. Is that the most important value, or one of the most important values that we want to reach as a city? Aren't there other areas that we should be concerned about at the high level, such as creativity, civic participation, progressivity, welcoming people of all, from all areas around the world? It just seems to me that we're hammering away too much at efficiency, and there's other ways to solve it when there are other things that are equally important.
Well, I'm going to start by answering Bob's part of the question first.
That's all right.
Efficiency is not the goal of democracy. Democracy is messy by intention to ensure the rights of people. The most efficient form of government is a dictatorship. None of us want that. As to whether we can, improve efficiency in the current form of government, absolutely. And in fact, it was the current form of government that commissioned the Hackett Report precisely to find those opportunities.
The commission thought about that very carefully. We came up with 6 core values: representation and inclusiveness, responsiveness and accessibility, leadership, effectiveness, efficiency, and accountability and integrity. What we did is we held up those values to every possible system, and we went back and forth and made sure that all of those values would be important in the decision about what type of form we recommended, and that's how we came about it.
Next question.
B.J. Seymour, City Club member. Parenthetical, insert Chris Smith. You did wear a suit today, not a tie, but you're not in shorts as you usually are. And it's even warm out today. This question is for Chris. You said that you felt that the Citizens Commission could have been more representative. What groups or populations would have been included if it had met your criteria?
Well, I think simply more people who recognized what it is that people like about the commission form of government. We did have Jillian Detweiler, former aide to Charlie Hales, who I think is a good spokesperson for the commission form, but I think Jillian was frankly outnumbered, so a little bit more balance would have produced a better result, I think.
Chris, I served on that commission for 14 months, over the 100 public meetings and 2,000 hours, and I can tell you, you are absolutely wrong. That group of diverse citizens had independent thought. They did not come in with anybody's agenda. They had very open minds, and frankly, more of the people on that citizen commission were apt and leaned towards keeping the current form, the commission form, when they started. But after listening to the testimony and hearing what everybody had to say and thinking about what was best for Portland, by a 2/3 majority, at every vote we took, the Citizen Commission voted to make this change, and it was very diverse. We had members from the African American, Hispanic, gay and lesbian, business, labor, average citizens. We had youth, we had some college students. All of these people represented all of Portland.
We have time for a couple more questions. Please go ahead.
I'm Susan Pierce. I'm a City Club member. I'm also, like Chris, community activist who was not selected for the committee. My question of Mr. Ball, but also Chris, when I first learned of this, I mean, the first presentation to me, my immediate thought was, I'm not sure we're going to have as much access. I have no trouble getting audiences with the current commissions, but I'm not sure we're going to have as much access, especially with the manager who's going to be so busy. What if I want my street fixed and I just can't get through to that person?
Well, we heard, first of all, that citizens, it was very confusing when they called city government because they'd call one commissioner. Most of the time they call the mayor to start with. And the mayor really doesn't have authority in a particular area, so they'll go to one bureau and then the other bureau will refer them to another bureau because it takes two bureaus to make the decision, and they get very, very confused. Here's how it'll change. Under a system where all the things are coordinated, you have a single access point for those types of problems. But more importantly for access is that if the bureaus, the chief administrative officers, or the mayor are not responding to you, you now have 5 access points to go to. You can go to any one of the commissioners and they can be your advocate to cause change. We heard in other cities, when a council member picks up the phone and says, hey, look, I'd like you to solve this problem, the bureaus, or they call them departments in other cities, they get right on it. So one, a centralized place to go for your problems that's easier to understand, and 2, the access improves because the number of access points increases. Again, we heard universally the commissioners spend 75% of their time, 80% of their time managing bureaus. It's very hard to get appointments with them. You get somebody called a liaison or something. You can't even talk to the commissioners. And that'll change under this. They'll have more time to listen to citizens and to respond to their needs.
We have time for 2 very brief questions, sir.
I'd like to
Let me come back.
If I
come back to you.
All right.
David Weber, City Club member. Could you remind us what impact you envision for the commissioners under this measure in terms of workload and staffing requirements? It's like the job description.
We found that, well, first of all, the commissioners will be they'll be setting all of the policy for the city bureau. So they're going to have to be very involved with the bureau still. They'll be able to form committees, which, by the way, the first time the Charter Commission said that actual citizens could sit on council level committees that a city council member would chair. So they'll be setting all of the policies for the bureaus. They'll be in charge of the budget. We put in a requirement that the city council members will actually have to be out in the community talking to citizens for the first time. They'll still have their quasi-judicial responsibilities. That's figuring out land, zoning issues, and all those kinds of things. We looked at calendars of city council people in other cities and found that when they're not managing the bureau, still they have 12-hour days regularly. They're very busy people.
Bob, I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm getting the signal from our esteemed president, Susan Hammer, that we've come to the end of this portion. I'm sorry, sir, but we have just a brief period of time left for closing statements. By prior agreement, Chris Smith will go first. Chris, you have 90 seconds to wrap up.
Well, thank you, Nick, and I'd like to thank City Club for the opportunity to be here today. This is a very familiar microphone for me, but this is the first time I've had to answer questions rather than ask them, so it's a new experience. I'd like to thank Bob. Bob and I have had the opportunity to do this 4 or 5 times now, and Bob is a great debate opponent, and I respect his commitment to his position and the work he's done on this issue. I just want to take a minute to remind people why it is that we believe the commission form produces the great city that we live in. And that is simply that we have passionate, engaged leaders for our critical city functions that are directly elected by and accountable to the citizens of Portland. That's part of why we have such great citizen engagement here in Portland. That's why we have the creativity we have in the way we've address the challenges that are facing cities all around the country. So I ask that as you get your ballots this weekend that you mark no next to 2691. If you'd like more information, feel free to visit our website at toomuchpower.org. Thank you.
Bob Ball?
Well, I want to finish by saying thank you too. But it's really not just our leaders that make our city great. It's the citizens of our city that make this such a wonderful place to be, whatever form of government we have. On May 15th, we're going to have the opportunity to support a package of much-needed reforms to eliminate the duplication, to improve the coordination that I talked about today, to tear down the walls between our city bureaus, and end the frustrating inefficiency that costs taxpayers both time and money. Those recommendations include some of the first changes to our city charter like this since 1913, and frankly, it's about time. We're the last city this size to use this outdated and inefficient city government. The independent audit that we talked about said that in the beginning we could just right away we could start saving that $10 to $15 million a year. Last year we learned that Portland had fallen to 37th out of 46 cities in how well we manage our finances and deliver critical city services. These changes would allow us to put more police officers in the neighborhoods where crime is concerned. We could improve our neighborhood parks. We could have more programs to help our children. We could focus more dollars on affordable housing and the other things that are important to the citizens of Portland. I want to end by saying the commission form of government impacts everyday people who have a simple question or problem or are just trying to do the right thing. For them, City Hall is a confusing maze, a place where individual bureaus each have their own rules and regulations. Big business, big labor, we'll always have access under any system. If you support these reforms, we'll keep Portland a better place for our children and our grandchildren. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, in the great City Club tradition, we were more light than heat today. Let's give our 2 panelists a round of applause. Nice job, Chris.
On behalf of the City Club of Portland, I'd like to thank you all for being here today. I'd like to thank our radio and television audience for their interest in City Club. And again, join me in thanking Nick Fish, Bob Ball, and Chris Smith for being with us in very interesting presentations. We are adjourned.